In today's video, we're going to be diving into the upcoming pattern where we do have a massive, very impactful Arctic blast on the way that is going to bring the coldest air of the season so far. We're going to be discussing the tropics because I know so many of you have been commenting and asking about the potential for a Caribbean or Gulf threat of a tropical system or even a hurricane. We're going to be discussing that today, as well as the overall upcoming pattern and, of course, that Arctic blast. Let's dive into things. We're taking a look at the European models, the European ensemble models, low pressure from each individual member. So this is a really good model to look at. We get to see each and every member. And what we see is Milton's remnants. We see really good agreement. That's a great example of every single member basically being on board with low pressure. And that is because the low pressure already exists. So, of course, we see that. And I mean, we see this one off of Africa, heading potentially towards the Caribbean or United States. That's not what we're discussing today, although that is a threat down the line. We will be talking about that a little bit later on. And then we have one out here in the middle, kind of moving towards Europe and Africa. So that one's a little bit of a non-threat for the United States, of course. And what everybody's been asking me about is not any of these three that look very, very likely. It's actually this one right here, where we see maybe 5 or 6, maybe a couple more members showing something. It's very weak. We do see a couple heading towards Central America, one kind of breaking free into the Gulf, but it stays at about 1,002. I think it would develop more than that. So we probably have one member on board out of about, I think it's 20 or 30 members here on this European ensemble model. So very, very low chance from the European ensemble model. As we move into the GFS ensemble model, things get a little bit messier. We do see Milton here, good agreement. This one heading towards Africa or Europe, good agreement. And even this one off of Africa heading towards the Caribbean, pretty good agreement. But again, here is your system moving into potentially the Gulf, and we have about 3 or 4 members, but the GFS ensemble model actually has about 10 more members than the European one. So if we're going kind of on a percentage basis, we're obviously, each member means a little bit less than the European model. We are seeing that there's about, I think, 4 or 5 in here. A couple of these do get pretty intense, which I do think would happen, by the way. If it did move into this eastern Gulf of Mexico, we would probably see really decent development, unfortunately. So we will obviously keep our eyes peeled on this, but this is why we haven't really dedicated a video purely to this topic, because it is not looking as likely as Helene or Milton did, in my opinion. We're seeing a lot more question marks as far as if this thing is even going to develop. We do preach on the channel, of course, that anything is possible, so that is why I'm addressing it. We do see a couple members in here, and this is certainly a possibility, just not by any means a likelihood at this point. And I've seen more model guidance actually suggesting that it heads towards Central America and then into the southern Gulf of Mexico a lot more, which typically would break up a system more than anything. So if we saw it head in this direction, that's really leaning towards, a lot less development than if it heads into open water here over the open eastern Gulf of Mexico. So keep that in mind. We're going to be monitoring this, probably talking about it until it either is expected to develop or until it is a non-threat. So this is something I am watching for, not something I am calling for or leaning towards at this point. It's just a possibility. It's purely that. And again, Helene and Milton both had much higher probabilities of developing at about this point in their forecast range. So I'm a lot less confident in seeing something out of this than I was in Helene or Milton. Not to say that it won't develop, but I just wanted to answer you guys' questions. And yes, this is a slim possibility that I have been keeping my eyes on. But again, not nearly as prominent of a signal that when compared to what we saw with Helene or Milton. Let's move into the upcoming pattern and just talk about it. This is this evening, and what we see is a flatter jet stream. We do see some low pressure over the Hudson Bay and to the south of it, bringing some rainfall into these areas. We're going to begin to see a push to the south with this cold air very quickly, and a really, really strong surge to the north with warm air out west. So we're going to end up with a jet stream much like this momentarily, actually. So let's move this towards tomorrow on Saturday. We begin to see some cooler air becoming available over eastern Canada, even a snow system happening over far eastern Canada there. A little bit of precipitation here along the boundary, along the upper Midwest and Great Lakes, which is very, very common, by the way. I want to take us straight towards Sunday, and this is where things become very, very apparent. Look at the northern surge that has happened of warm and dry air out west. We see almost no storms here for at least the western United States. Very warm air, and that is extending into western Canada as well. And we see this really strong push to the south with this cooler air. We see a low pressure system developing here over the Ohio Valley, and we're actually going to see this become a nor'easter. It's going to move off kind of the northeast coast and become a pretty hefty system. A big time rain and wind maker, but also some snowfall for the mountainous east is going to be a possibility from this one. So let's just extend this. I don't want to keep you guys waiting towards Tuesday, and we do see this stronger storm, 994, a decent little nor'easter. We do see some snowfall here in Canada. A lot of rainfall around for much of the Midwest, Great Lakes, Mid-Atlantic and Northeast here, as well as Eastern Canada. And we obviously have much cooler air around than what we had been seeing. As we move towards Tuesday, we're getting closer and closer to the peak of all of this. What we see is that the mountainous Northeast is seeing some snowfall in there. We'll look at the total snowfall in a minute. This nor'easter has basically done this. It wasn't that far offshore, but you get the point. It moves back into Canada as a 990, so that's kind of just sticking around, a big-time rainmaker here in the eastern states and also the eastern provinces of Canada. Even some snowfall here in the northeast of Canada. A little less populated, of course, but there is some snowfall coming down. If you happen to live there and be watching this, your jet stream by this point is doing something along these lines. It's the coldest the further north you go, but don't let this map confuse you. There is also anomalously cold temperatures, or anomalously cold temperatures over the east and southeast even, so we're seeing that taking place. We'll look at the temperatures in a minute, of course. As we move this towards Wednesday, we do see a storm system moving onshore to the west. A big time low over western Canada with a cold front underneath, warm front up to the north here. We do still see cold air in the east, but this is going to be starting to move out after we reach the midweek point. So this is Wednesday, the midweek point. We will take this a step further towards Thursday here, and we see it really, really beginning to move out as we get this bit of a cool down out west, ridge over the central states, and now just kind of a minor trough left over for the east. But warming is the trend for a lot of these eastern areas as we reach late next week, with cooler air, snowy, rainy, all the precipitation types basically out west by this point. So again, Thursday into Friday, 17th into 18th. Let's move this towards Friday on the 18th, and what we see is some snowfall still for kind of the Pacific Northwest into Western Canada. We do see some really interesting weather across the southern Rockies into the plains here, where we have some snowfall for Wyoming and Colorado, which is very common this time of year. But also we have this really quick rising jet stream across the plains. Could bring some thunderstorm activity here. Wouldn't surprise me one bit, even some severe weather. We'll be watching very closely for that. As we move towards Saturday, we see that frontal boundary becoming a lot more intense. It doesn't appear like we're going to have a massive amount of cold air behind this, but there could be some, and it could be something that brings us back into the below average category in the east as it continues to move through. By Sunday, we see a little bit of a ridge in the west and a little bit of a trough over the east here is the look. So we get some, again, cooler air moving into the east. Still along the east coast, rather warm here, but definitely some high pressure out west and also some above normal temperatures for a lot of these areas. That is the look, and we really get to the end of the model run here, and it's a lot of the same. Again, no tropical activity really pops up in the Gulf. There is a lot of moisture, so it is possible, as we mentioned many times earlier, but definitely not seeing that occur here on this model. Your jet stream is a smaller trough, much smaller especially than that one that happened the week prior by this point, but still some cooler air in the east likely. Total precipitation, we are seeing some decent amounts over the west, the northwest in particular. The plains also seeing a good amount here. And then for a lot of your kind of northern Great Lakes into the interior northeast and mid-Atlantic. And then also along that Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico, we do have quite a bit of activity, but rather dry is going to be the trend for a lot of areas here. So let's look at it. We do see above average amounts for that Pacific Northwest into Southwest Canada, the Gulf of Mexico, and, you know, some of the Caribbean here seeing some above average amounts, but really, I mean, mostly below normal for most areas in the central, most of the west, actually, west, central, and eastern states, really continuing this dry fall that we've seen so far. As we take a look at the total snowfall, there is some expected for the Cascades and Rockies here, so a few inches definitely possible for those mountaintop locations. And we do see some flakes flying, perhaps, for the upper Midwest. And then also for the mountainous east here, we do see a couple of inches perhaps for the Adirondacks. Green Mountains, White Mountains is possible with some flakes flying in other places. Definitely something that I'm going to be watching for very closely. Let's take a look at the temperature anomalies. And we do see below normal temperatures in the east with above normal for most of the west and central states here. But nothing too crazy, just, you know, kind of a cooler pattern. As we move through Saturday here, we see we flatten out with more of a warmer pattern around the nation. But here comes that Arctic blast. This is Sunday. It's beginning for the northern plains, upper Midwest, Great Lakes, Northeast here. We see the west warming up rapidly. By Monday, it's digging deep to the south, and we're seeing areas throughout the plains, Midwest, Ohio Valley, even the deeper south beginning to get impacted by this. The Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, all involved. And then again, Tuesday is approximately the peak of this. We have cooler air for most of the east here. Not only that, there's a core in there with these greens and even the other blues. The greens are 10 to 15 degrees below what is normal for mid-October. And those purplish colors within those greens is going to be 15 to 25 degrees, what is normal for this time of year. So again, a lot of people saying, oh, this is normal for this time of year. It's absolutely not. You know, normal would be 10 to 15 degrees above this, or, you know, in the purplish colors, 15 to 25 degrees above this. So this is going to be significantly colder than what is typical for this time of year. Keep in mind. As we move through, again, later that week, we are going to begin to see this move out, but still, I mean, Wednesday here, Thursday, it's not really moving out in a hurry, but by Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we do begin to see some warming, although just like we've seen with our previous cooldowns this year, the East Coast wants to hold on to that colder air. So definitely something that I would say is a likelihood. The models are showing it. History is telling us, or at least the recent history, that this is the pattern that we're in. So expect to see the East Coast hold on to that a lot longer than other areas. The GFS model, it's the same thing actually, but a little bit more intense. This is Monday. Look at those greens and purplish blues are a lot more significant. And then Tuesday here, same story. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we do see the East try to hold on to those cold temperatures, but not quite as much as the European model. And then we get kind of stuck in a cold in the West, warm in the East pattern later on, but take that with a grain of salt because it is beyond 10 days out. As we take a look at the overall tropics, again, nothing popping up for the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico at this point. We do have Tropical Storm Leslie out there, which is likely kind of coming to an end at this point. And then that area that will be likely moving towards North America in general, not saying that it's going to hit there, but it is going to be moving towards the west overall. There is a 50% chance of development over the next 48 hours and a 50% chance over the next 7 days. So this will be one that we're watching, and likely this one has a better chance of eventually impacting the United States than the Gulf threat. But again, there's still a chance of that, and we will be monitoring it. Anyway, guys, be sure to subscribe. We do upload every single day. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it. Leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.